Woodin of Woodin Math and the Landmark School with us today to talk about all things Dyscalculia, dyslexia, and math. I'm so excited. You were personally requested by several people to join us today.
Great.
You've been our most requested guest to have on Dyslexia Coffee Talk so far.
Well, I'm real excited to be here. And hopefully people that have a little math anxiety or have that running in their families or with their students, we can try to take some of that away and replace it with some strategies to move forward. How about that?
That'll be awesome. So everybody's home. Everybody's trying to figure out the homeschool thing for their kids. How do you recommend starting off with sort of evaluating where your child currently is, what they're struggling with from a math perspective, what they're not struggling with, and how does a parent go from there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. In that, when you look at how a kid is doing and their perception of how they're doing and the school's perception and your perception, those aren't always the same thing. Unless it's going badly, then it tends to all be the same. I think what's important to acknowledge is there's so much emphasis on how a kid is doing based on how old the student is. So it's not looking at strengths, weaknesses, it's looking at in terms of testing and everything else is how are you doing with grade level material? There's a great level of interest within the state and all the frameworks and the teachers to try to teach at grade level when your student may not be at grade level. And I think one of the biggest causes of dysfunction is continuing to hammer away at the place where the kid is supposed to be versus where the kid is, and people not really wanting to acknowledge that. And that's what creates lots of anxiety and lots of dysfunction. So I think the first thing you need to do is look at where the student is. When you see dysfunction, understand that dysfunction at the instructional level, where the kid is usually not fixed by just more. Sometimes that's okay. Doing more, being more, having more practice at the same grade level. If that's not immediately making a difference, you need to look at the underlying issues. So think about this. The lights won't come on in your room. Well, don't keep flicking the light switch, right? It either is going to work or it's not going to work. And if it doesn't work, you've got to look for a deeper, more systemic problem and try to address the effect by looking at the cause and going that way. So you need to look at the underlying problems that are manifesting themselves within what you see on the grade level material that's being covered. Does that make sense at all?
Yes, I think it makes. I don't have dyslexia. I've never been tested for dyscalculia, and I'm probably saying dyscalculia incorrectly because I hear people say it a variety of ways. But I was somebody that I always struggled in math rather substantially. It was not easy for me to do at all. And funny story, I do actually have a graduate degree, so I did get over this hill in my life, but I got kicked out of college when I was working on my undergraduate for failing math more than once. And when I got kicked out, I couldn't go home and tell my parents, hey, mom, dad, I just got kicked out of school. Here's your tuition money. I stopped at the community college in the town that I lived in on my way home, and I signed up for the math class that I had just failed. And it was during that semester that I drove, an hour and 15 minutes to where this class was to take this class every single, 3 days a week. And I wish that I knew the man's name, but he figured out how I learned math. And he did it on his own. I never spoke to him. I don't know why he singled me out of everybody that was in that classroom, but he singled me out. And he took the time and he cracked the code for how I learn math. And it was the greatest thing I've ever experienced in my life, because all of a sudden, all of it made sense. And it's like he set me free.
It's really cool that happened. I think everyone's looking for that magic bullet. I think what you found is my experience is as you look at the educational system, as the teachers you start seeing the teachers of older students as they're teaching older and older students, their methodology gets more and more narrow and focused toward the end result. If you look at, I know when I'm doing teacher training and I'm training preschool or up through third grade, the teachers will be really dynamic and understand the processes that are going on, and it's not just teaching procedure. And as you get into the higher material, everybody thinks that you just need to change and be just working at the procedural level, and you're not thinking a lot of these students that used to have support with different ways to understand things are now just getting hammered at with memorizing procedures. And that's what didn't work for them early on. They usually had a teacher that connected with them, that was able to do something more hold apart based on semantic reasoning, based on using graphic organizers, all those accommodations that you're supposed to get. So many of those get stripped away as you go through formal education, to the point where they just say, what do you mean? This is what I'm going to deliver, suck it up and make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
That's really not very efficient when you figure your cognitive profile doesn't really change that much after you're about 13. You're the same person. The mold is cast. And unfortunately, the person that has the most difficult time adapting and changing, the student, is the one that has to do all that. So it's really not fair, right? Yeah. So you think we're able to do that. And then breaking it down to when you have those problems early on in instruction, there's some programs and teachers that are able to acknowledge the causes and try to be dynamic. And then there's others that, if they've taught for a long time, they really get rigid and say, well, it's what worked for me, and it's what I've been doing, and I've had success with at least 80% of the kids. Unfortunately, I'm the person that teaches the other 20. That's all I get. So I'm always looking at some different way to go about helping somebody that's not benefiting from traditional methodology. So, it's not all about you as a teacher. You can use all of your experiences of how you learned, but you've got to know your client. You've got to know what that person can do, figure out and assess their strengths, figure out what they can't do. Mm-hmm. Stop shouting at the deaf person. It's not going to help. You have to find that island of competence that kids have and exploit it. And it's funny. You find that in different areas. You find out a kid has good spatial appreciation because they can play soccer, even if they don't have good, perhaps visual abilities in terms of graphomotor. So maybe their fine motor's corrupt, but their gross motor's fine, right? They have spatial planning, but not visual planning. You can use that if you know what to do. And there's not just one way of doing things. And we no longer accept that, at least for a lot of people, within the context of reading and language. But math is so far behind in the mainstream in terms of acknowledging you can do something different. You don't have to do what's written down in a textbook or what you had. You can be much more dynamic and reach the individual needs of the student if you know what they are and you're willing to learn about new methodologies that can support students learning through different modalities.
Wow.
Kind of flamed there. I did the soapbox thing. It's just I get people calling me, emailing me every day, like my kid is just floundering and drowning in gen ed, and no one's reacting. They'll look at, he's got a neuropsych. We identified he has no working memory. He has this, and all that stuff gets acknowledged, but the plan is still, well, let's do flashcards and let's do all these things that are parked a hole, and the kid has to be holed apart.
Wow. Well, and you said something very interesting when we were test running the technology yesterday, that your background's actually on the language side, not the math side.
Yeah, I went to Harvard. a long time ago now, and I had some fantastic teachers. And it was back when, if you people know the old literature, Jean Chall was one of my teachers she ran the language lab that Landmarks modeled after, and she was a stickler for making sure everything you said had a basis. Why are you saying that? What are the antecedents to the things that you're seeing, and how do you address those? And can you back up what you're saying, or is it opinion? Like, let's be diagnostic and prescriptive about the way that you approach teaching. If you go into a doctor and they just said, well, here's aspirin, or you have this, well, here's more aspirin, you wouldn't be happy. And with education, we have to be more resourceful, and you really need to be thinking, what's the appropriate therapy to dole out for what I'm seeing? How do I remediate this? And how do I get ahead of it so I'm not always trying to catch up? So yeah, I had language instruction, which is good because language research to practice is at least 30 years ahead of math in terms of being able to look at specific underlying problems and then acknowledge there are different ways to teach, understanding why certain therapies work and why certain therapies don't work. And it's still a very emerging science in terms of teaching. And when the boots hit the ground, how do teachers take this research and go in and help a kid? So that's keeping me very busy in terms of doing training all over the place. I think I'm in like 36, I'm up to 36 states, Puerto Rico and England, in terms of finding places to go educate teachers, trying to get away from the one-to-one therapies and trying to make a bigger impact with the website and more teacher training. But we really need to evolve, and there's such a need right now to help out those individual kids that aren't making it with the cookie cutter programs. Most kids do fine, but the kids that don't, it's really doing them a disservice.
Can you talk a little bit, I'm thinking about our audience in general, kind of across the board. Can you talk a little bit about what dyscalculia is and how and why that's different from dyslexia?
Yeah, well, there are a lot of similarities and there's some differences. So I look at the way that it's defined, sometimes in a real sloppy manner and sometimes in a better one. Let's think of dyslexia because that seems to be what more people are familiar with. The underlying core deficit there is a problem with the phoneme-grapheme relationship and those associations and how those students are processing and what's arresting them from being efficient within to become an efficient reader, so that you're using a different system and not the dorsal stream, which is going up into your interparietal sulcus, but being able to use that ventral stream going out more towards your temporal lobe and being able to get more associations and being able to find that word find area. It's the same type of thing. The core deficit for dyscalculia has more to do with quantity symbol associations. What's interesting is, generally speaking, those same dysfunctions happen with the same neural patterns. It's instead of being efficient and being able to see a pattern and naming it immediately, you're trying to put these little pieces together in a real part to whole way. And some people are able to quickly assimilate those patterns and put them into a meaningful context, and other people can't. And it has to do with how you're processing. So I'll tell you what, I'll show you a nifty way to do this. If you gather from around your room or your desk and you get maybe some pennies or anything, little balls of paper, anything. I have manipulative things like this, but if you get like 3 of them and you hold them up and you drop them on the table, you'll look at those 3 things and you'll immediately say there's 3 things, because you look at it at the corners and you'll look and it makes it shape. Does that make sense?
Yes.
What's amazing is that everybody can pretty much do that. When you get past 3 and you get to 4, that's a breaking point where all of a sudden some people are able to immediately say, hey, I see that there's 4 things, and other people start counting them. And then when you get to like 5, 6, you drop it, and for a lot of people, it's definitely just stuff. It doesn't make a pattern, and now I'm counting one by one. Does that make sense? Kind of like the way that if you're using synthetic phonics to spell cat, you're going ka-ata, you know? And eventually it all merges and you're seeing it all as a big chunk cat. It's kind of that same process where when you're in the part to whole type of processing mode, you're doing it differently than when you're doing whole to part, where you're looking at the whole pattern and then you're able to say, I know that that's 6, and inside 6 are all these other numbers. So it's cardinality, being able to match. I see how much stuff it is. I can count it. The last thing I count is the number of things. So that's where the core deficit lies. Again, dyslexia, it's phoneme, grapheme, and with the core deficit with dyscalculia is quantity simple. So in being able to name, I understand how many things are in a group. So if you have problems with that issue, that sets up a phenomenal poor learning curve for learning when you're about 4 going up to about 7, where you really need to internalize all those quantities up to 10. If you can't do that efficiently, you're always kind of going through this in like an alphabetic way, like how far is it from E to L? And so you'll count it. You might be a faster counter, but you never learn how to chunk things. You see what I mean? That's the underlying problem. It's very similar. And again, it uses the same general neural pathways. The architecture is pretty similar. It's just fascicles within that same architecture that's slightly different. But the dysfunction is pretty much the same.
Okay.
I have to say, hi. I joined in a little bit late. But you were describing for me what I've lived. So even though I jumped in the middle of what you were talking about, it makes so much sense to me, because I have struggled. I still count on my fingers. I wonder if that has something to do with it too, because I have to rely so much on that kind of stuff to be able to even do any basic math. But
Sure.
Yeah, I feel math has always been hard for me, and what you're describing, it makes so much sense to me now, that because I don't see patterns.
Yeah, and I think what happens is when you figure you have the cognitive endowment. You've got what you got. You see what I mean? You've got this machine, but if you're putting diesel fuel into the gas engine, it's not going to run very well. You know what I mean? And that's what's happened. So our educational system is really almost all part to whole. It's assuming that that counting methodology is going to help you. You might look out and see a tree and say it's a tree. You don't have to count and look at every leaf, right? So if you go whole to part, it makes so much sense, and it lets everybody participate in the same type of model. So consider this: if you stick out your left hand, this is going to be backwards for you. I'll have to do it this way.
Yeah.
If you stick out your left hand and put out one more finger, and I say how many fingers, you'll see kids going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
because I was one of those kids. Yeah.
What's on your hand? I mean, say 5, right? Okay,
Yeah.
So how much is this? We'll say 5, and it's one more, 6, right? And so when you do this hold apart, you see, I'm saying, well, this is 6. It's how much more than 1? And you can take things apart and put it back together. Using these basic hold apart structures, you can teach really sophisticated math, but you can also get at that core deficit, which is being unable to see pieces within the whole. So I start out with this icon. So it's 5. What I want you to do is consider those 2 top dots to be my eyes, and the middle dot to be my nose, and the corners of my mouth, the bottom 2. So the reason you can look at this and immediately go to quantity is where Sherwood says you have a word form area. Well, you have another area down there for quantities like that, facial recognition, and to be able to access those first and say, okay, that's 5. Okay, now count the dots if you want to. Go hold apart, but don't go part to whole. So think of that picture I showed you before, and now I'll show you this one, and I'll say what's missing. Do you see the difference? Filling in that center dot, my nose. Yeah. So that's the thing. I take
Wow.
things apart and I put them back together, and then I strap language to it. So it's processing that everybody has. If you recognize a face, you can do this.
So are you saying that me at 48 can still learn math in a way that, like, okay, this is really interesting to me actually, because I've always said I can't do math, and I've worked with really wonderful math teachers who said, well, you can, you just haven't had a good math teacher. And so as someone who works with kids with dyslexia and feels very confident with dyslexia, I feel like, well, yeah, I could go back, right, and learn everything about how I need to learn math so that I could be successful in math. Is that?
Think of this like syllabicating a number. You know, instead of breaking the word up and being able to spell it by its component parts, but here's the word, the whole word. See the chunks. You recognize the cat and you recognize nip, and this is catnip, but those chunks are in there. Can you find those? That strategy will work for you. Everybody has this. You just have to learn how to turn it on. So it's there. Do you see what I mean?
That's exciting.
Yeah, it is. So I mean, I used to do quite a bit of tutoring with people just like you, Ashley, that had issues in college, and they understood that they'd come to me saying, you got to help me. And I'll be like, well, you're going to think this is strange. I know you're trying to learn linear algebra, but you've got to learn how to add and understand what a fraction is. And that's where we're going to start. And I'll do it in a hold apart semantic way, so you don't have to try to put all these pieces together if you don't have the ability to do that.
I love that.
So based on what you just said, I have a question for you. So
Sure.
I mean, my son's dyslexic. Math is something that makes sense to him in so many ways. He loves math. He wants to be an astronomer when he grows up now and when I told him, he asked me how hard it would be to become an astronomer. And I said, well, it's all math. And he was like, good, I can do that. But he has very fundamental weaknesses with division. Multiplication was something that was a struggle for him. And so now that they've done fractions a lot, he struggles with something like fractions. I don't know if it's how he's being taught, because I know that he can do it and his spatial awareness is just through the roof. But it hurts me to see it, because he is so extremely talented at math. And I see these, it's like a foundation's being built, but very key cornerstones are not being added to what he needs to be able to keep building on that.
Yeah, so here's the thing to think about. It is directly tied to the way that you're being taught. So the way some kids will excel, or sometimes kids will be okay with addition, subtraction, that's fine. And then they'll have problems with multiplication. Well, multiplication is taught with verbal strings. It's all done with auditory learning. When I'm saying 7 times 7 is 49, you're not thinking of 49 things. Agreed? So, I mean, it's already, it's very language based, and you're basically remembering that just like short little snippets. You're just remembering these verbal chunks of code. They don't necessarily have any meaning, though. So that's the problem. You'll have students that excel at addition, subtraction, because they understand, they really have good visual processing, and they have visual working memory that works. That can really allow you to do lots of math like that. But as soon as the instruction changes, like now we're going to do multiplication, and it's a lot of verbal memorization, and more importantly, a lot of organizational and auditory working memory demands of how you categorize those facts, so you don't just forget them when you learn the next fact family. So remember, memory is really, and recall is really an effect of storage. So if you store it as just a bunch of phone numbers that you're memorizing, well, now if I give you another list of phone numbers, what happens to the first list? It gets blown out of your auditory memory and messed up, and so now you don't have a way to recall specific facts. Flashcards, same kind of thing. Think about this. You're going to write a bunch of facts like states and their capitals on an index card. So here's Vermont and Montpelier. You write that on a card. Now, eventually you got 50 of these cards on the table, right? And you're saying, well, what's the capital of South Carolina? Well, is it this one? Nope. Is it this one? You want to do that 48 more times? So if your working memory is not up to the task, you're not storing this in a hierarchical manner, as you don't have, it hasn't been taught to you that way. but there's ways to do that. I guess this would be a good time for me to just say, I have all this stuff written down. So if this stuff is starting to pique your interest, go to woodinmath.com, not right now, because I want to talk to you for a little bit. But everything I'm talking about is on there. All the articles, everything I'm talking about. Yale Center for Dyslexia and Creativity, I wrote a big article for them. That's on there. Describes all these different cognitive assets and how they relate to their expression within the context of math. So check out that. There's also tons of worksheets, graphic organizers, things that are really difficult to show you in this medium. They're all on there. Lots of worksheets where there's embedded links. So they're Google Docs. So when you're going through, there might be a division problem there. Right above it, it'll say division movie. You click on it and it shows me teaching how to do that problem. And so many other things. So I mean, if you get stuck on what I'm saying and say that made sense, but I'm going to forget it, you maybe write down a topic or something. But go to the website, and there's so many resources there in terms of all the primary references that I'm citing, all the many articles that I've written. They're all on there for free. It doesn't cost you a penny. So have at it.
So we did have one question that came in from somebody that I actually know before we went live. That they wanted me to ask you how to navigate your resources. This is a single mom with a few kids, and one of them is a teenager. He's really struggling with his dyslexia. She says it's on there and she gets overwhelmed trying to figure out how do you recommend working your site?
Sure. First of all, the site's free. The reason why is because it's not meant to be a program, and it's not like I have a team of people working on this. It's me and my dogs, getting the material up and running, and one can't answer the phone, the other one can't type. So it's basically me getting it all on there. So, and I don't charge for anything. So right. This is what I do, in the wee hours of the morning, is get all this stuff uploaded. It's not really meant to be a replacement for a course. It's meant to be a resource for teachers that kind of know what they're doing and have taken training by me. So it's something where you generally take a course, and then these are all the materials that you get for free. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't navigate it. If you go to the curriculum bank, that has materials tied to the curricular framework. So if you're able to look at perhaps 8th grade, you'll look at that and you'll see all the different Common Core standards listed, and next to them there are cells that you click on, and then there's worksheets there, and usually a video right next to it that shows you how to use that resource. And that's building every day. I put more things on, 3 or 4 new things, but it's straddling, pre-kindergarten all the way through Algebra 1. So
wow.
It's slow to go on and it's spread out, but I keep putting new things on every day. So there is a lot of material, but it's not meant to be a program. It's not like you're supposed to start someplace and end someplace. It's for you to find how to teach a specific skill, and different methodologies for how to go about something that's maybe not paper and pencil based, but you would really benefit from training to navigate it. That's the intended use.
Okay. I'm anxious to dive into your website because I personally want to look at how to teach the times tables, because that was something that I could never really commit. My son will look at me and go, "Mom, what's 8 times 8?" And I'm like, "I don't know. Go ask your dad."
There's definitely a sequence that I do have a program for. Not trying to sell anything, but that's down in a book. Okay, so you can get this book from the website, and it's all scripted. It tells you exactly what to do, and it's based on semantic gross motor strategies, ways for you to learn multiplication facts where you're not just using auditory memory. So that's a program that you can use. There's also a low-level numeracy class that's on the website, which is a program, and that's what the work I'm doing with Nessie. That's what's happening there. They're digitizing that to develop numeracy with really young kids to attack that core deficit, to get them into the zone where they can start learning math. Because until they get the ability to break the code with numbers, it's painful, and it just doesn't get better until you build those foundational skills. Just like if you don't have the phonemic awareness, why bother with phonics? You've got to get the understanding of how to differentiate sounds and differentiate quantities and see how one quantity relates to another before anything will strap on. Mm-hmm. So that's what's real exciting. So yeah, look forward to Nessie. All right, they've got some great programs that are coming. Yeah. And the thing about that is you won't need to become a trainer or become trained. It'll guide you through, and you'll learn with your child.
So how do you recommend? So I mean, I'm just like every other parent that's out there. I'm home now trying to teach my child myself. How do you recommend that I sort of tap into, and using me as an example for everybody else out there, how do I tap into where my son's weaknesses are and potentially use your materials to sort of figure out or plug those holes of understanding that he has?
Yeah, again, I would look at how you're evidencing like a dysfunction, like saying, okay, my kid's having problems with fractions. Understand that, yeah, you might have a problem with fractions, but you probably have more of a problem with something that's a lower level skill that goes into that. And I'll give you a quick example. All right, so seeing's better than me just yammering away here. Part to whole with fractions. If I hold up this and I said, what fraction's green? I'm going to say a half, right? Okay, so I want you to think of this procedurally. How did they teach you to take this and expand that? So I mean, I want you to think of, I've got to make a common denominator where 4 is going to be the denominator. So you multiply it, right? So then you get 2/4, right? All right, so you get this. So in the kid's mind, they're saying it's an equal fraction. Does that look equal to you?
Nope.
So you're doing this part to whole, and you're telling them that, yeah, these fractions are equal. Well, if it's chocolate, I want this half. I want 2/4. I don't want a half, because that's not as much stuff. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
You set up all these discrepant events that are not described well with language. If you go hold apart, think how you could do this. Start with this whole picture, right? And say, this is 2/4, but I can have 2 halves, right? So how many halves are green? 1 out of 2. Do you see what I mean? So if you go hold apart, you can use the same model. Now, to make that even better, I want you to think of this as these are paws of a dog, all right? And he's been walking along the side of a road, and half of his paws are really muddy and the other are clean, right? So how would you describe the paws? And notice when I use that word paws, what number goes with paws? As long as something bad doesn't happen, 4, right? So that's already embedded. So many kids have a problem with language being able to assign values of groups to things. So they'll say, I want you to think 2 groups of the, and you forget what's the group thing, how many are in a group. If I say, I want you to think of a dog, and half of this dog is muddy. So tell me about paws. How many paws are muddy? 2 out of 4. Do you see? And so I'm giving you a model. It's one model that'll model both fractions. So it's strategies like that, using semantics. The kid understands meaning from the world, and he has that context, but math doesn't usually make use of that. It's something that you would do at the end, and I do it at the beginning. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Good. So like, I'll give you another picture in your mind. Picture a 6-pack of soda. All right. It's 2 one way and 3 the other. All right. So a half of that is full. So one side of that 6-pack is full. So what's another fraction for a half? 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1/2. 1 3/6, right?
Mhm.
You see what I mean? So you've got the picture, and that's going to travel with you. Whereas these blocks, they go away when the blocks go away. So all that shading and everything the kids seem to be doing really well with, it doesn't transfer to the procedure they're going to strap onto it. So it's a big waste of time. So I have a lot of material in the fractions section. If you go to it, you'll get an idea of how I go through and map all this stuff out, make it so you can look at it. Semantically, it makes sense, and the picture matches the procedure.
Okay.
So I guess to answer your question, which I kind of danced around, the big picture is you got to figure out your client in terms of there's certain ways that kid has learned, maybe not in the context of math, but there's places where that kid excels, and there's a teaching methodology that worked. So all you have to do is use that same type of educational program within the context of math, and you got to be willing to do a little out of the box thinking to see how to do that. There are some better best practices that can be used that'll accommodate lots more kids. But that's the secret, is say, look, this kid's great in art. Well, what are the demands behind that? What are the conditions that allowed that child to do well and excel and thrive in this one subject? But now his handwriting is terrible. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So maybe the kid actually, think about it, is drawing the letters and not really, doesn't have them automatized. So gross motor therapies work really well to learn all those motor plans. There's lots of ways to get around or work through those issues. But I always start with, instead of looking at the deficits, look at the strengths and see how you can strap those to effective learning strategies. There's a lot out there, and you can feel free to ask me. I answer lots of emails. So go ahead.
I'm wondering, Chris, I'm sorry, I keep coming back on and off. I'm having technical difficulties today. But one of the things I do with my students is I play Pictionary. We play category Pictionary. So we pick a category and then we draw a picture. And I'm sorry, I have a little bit of an echo. What's interesting to me is, do I have an echo still? Is the kids draw part to whole, as opposed to whole to part, the ones that are really good at math, I've noticed. And my kids that struggle with reading and writing, but they're able to, that's a commonality of all of my students, or a lot of my students that are good with math, is that they'll draw, I'll draw a tree, I'll try to draw the whole tree, and they'll start to draw the trunk, and then, or they'll draw like a very simple part of the hammer, and then all of a sudden it's a hammer, whereas I try to draw the outline of a hammer. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. And it's a function of how they've been taught. And actually, it's usually a function where I see a big correlate in working memory. So if you can't see the leaves within the tree, you see what I mean? So you're going to do a leaf at a time. That's, again, that's going through and counting. Those are the same types of kids that sometimes think there's a letter in the alphabet, elemento. You know what I mean? They say it, but they don't know how to picture it within the context of something else. So yeah, you have to drive, just like in language therapy, you would have to start out and do something more whole to part. That's exactly what you have to do with math. They're not going to get it part to whole. They're showing you that. You have to, again, say, here's the picture, take this out of it and put it back. You see what I mean? So as if, just like I'm doing this, you see my face, and I take this away, and maybe you've got 5 Cheerios in front of you, and they take away those top 2, and I'll say, put it back. And you just modeled 3 + 2 is 5. Do you see?
Wow.
So it's that kind of strategy that's going to help you. So just like, think of that kid is going to crash and burn within the context of learning fractions because of all the different little subroutines and steps in there. Consider this. What's a half plus a tenth? And people are going, oh, don't make me do math, right? But if I give you what the graphic organizer, which it's going to be your fingers, okay? The common denominator is going to be 10. So if I said, do this and say, wiggle a half. So what fraction is that? 5/10, right? Okay, and then add a tenth. How many fingers are you going to have? 6 out of 10. Okay, now let's do the horrible math procedure that's going to match that. Does that make sense? So
Wow. Yeah.
this is something that you're going to have. It matches with something that rings true. I have the graphic organizer, and you're helping that kid mitigate those working memory problems. I'm not going to say, here's 6, 7 directions that you have to knit together and organize. I'm going to have you figure it out, hold apart. I know it's going to be 6 out of 10. And now I'll put those little pieces together of procedure to make it look like what Miss Crump is making me do in Mayberry. Does that make sense? That's the secret to all this. So take it apart and the kids put it back together. But you got to have semantics. You got to have meaning. When you look at dyslexics profile, one thing that seems to rise above in commonality is their scores where semantics are involved, meaning is involved for them to figure things out. That's elevated. You got to use that. You don't do it where just do this because I'm telling you to. Have them figure out the thrust of the problem and then stick the details in. It works with invented spelling, right? Well, you spell something wrong in math and it's wrong.
Yeah.
Doesn't that stink? So
yeah,
they're able to get through. Like nobody cares if you can spell anything anymore. But if you spell something wrong, like 102, 1002, well, it's wrong. So
that's true.
Yeah. Start out with the number and do it that way.
Yeah, my least favorite explanation that I got for something in all of my math classes was, well, just because, just do it.
Yeah.
And I was like, my mind doesn't work that way. I need to understand why. You're not telling me why.
It's the tax code. You know, when you're doing your taxes and they make you do 6 subroutines to figure out that you don't get that deduction, that's math instruction the wrong way. Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah.
That's bad.
I pay somebody to do my taxes.
Well, no one wants to be told what to do, with understanding why. If they just said, did you spend more than you make? Well,
that's true.
Well, and I shared my story with you earlier. What that teacher found out about me was he went, you need to work immediately. He said, it makes sense to you, but then you're leaving the classroom, you're going to other classes, you're going home, you're going to your job, you're doing all kinds of stuff. We have a terrible echo right now. But he went, if you don't immediately do it, you're not retaining it at all.
Yeah, and you can evoke motor memory, which is really strong. I have so many different activities that involve kinesthesia that drive kids through it, like learning the 5 by standing in the middle of a clock, where they're at the center primary reference frame of that kid. And they can understand, I'm pointing this way, pointing that way, and matching that to where all the clock positions are. Then I can teach before and after on all those words. Think about this. Here's just a real simple example of how reference frame can really mess with you. If you were looking at a presentation like you are now, like on the chalkboard, and somebody was describing a division problem, and they said, I'm going up here, and that's where the quotient goes, and down here is where you subtract, you go down. Okay, now transfer that. You're now looking at a piece of paper on your desk. Does that make sense? Now, in a real literal way, which way is up when you're looking at your paper? Okay, that's away from you. It's not up. Up is this way. So it's subtle things like that if you can't be flexible with that language, you're dead in the water before you even start, because you don't understand how the directions have to do with what you're doing on the paper. You put the kid where he's walking on a big completed problem on the ground that I've written out in chalk. The whole thing's done, and he's walking through the process as he's explaining what he's doing. That gets cemented into motor memory, and it integrates your motor plan with your auditory understanding of the directions, along with your visual processing. It all gets bundled together. Those types of strategies.
Makes so much sense.
It works.
What you're saying makes so much sense to me as just someone trying to learn math, but also working with my students with dyslexia. And I'm so glad you're saying all this, because I think it's important too that we talk about when we're writing goals for IEPs, that when we're talking about math, it's also language. And that's something that a lot of people in the education world don't always consider, is that, math is so complicated when we're writing goals. It's not just math facts.
Right.
And
or reading the word problems. Yeah, it goes way beyond that. If you have cognitive limitations in a sub-skill in one of those in one of those, cognitive assets like auditory memory or visual perception or executive function, if you have a deficit there, it happens throughout your learning day. So it's not just constrained to, well, I need a template for writing an essay. Well, you need a template for doing a division problem or a multi-digit multiplication problem or an addition problem. And there's ways to add where you don't have to count. You can look at the answer and pull it right out, diagram it yourself, use a different code. Again, all these things are really difficult for me to talk about, but if you go on the website, you'll see it. There's also my Chris Woodin YouTube channel that if you go on and make sure you subscribe to that, because I put out new videos every day. So check that out if you can. It'll really shake you up in terms of there's different ways to teach. You don't have to take the same turkey on white bread instruction. You can put some cranberry relish on that thing and make it really dynamic and useful to that individual learner.
So I have one more question for you, and then we've had a ton of questions come in. But I'm going to try to get this in there for you. So a child that's having dysgraphia, right? So that they're having issues, shaping the letters, et cetera. It goes to the numbers as well. One of the things that I have found interesting is some of the math mistakes that he makes has to do with lining things up.
Sure.
The dysgraphia is impacting.
Yeah.
How.
So you take that right out. What you've got to do is you've got to learn the motor planning, and you don't learn it by ignoring it. You can't. People that have things, kids that end up having a scribe taking care of and writing all this stuff down, they'll learn the motor plan, but you don't do it with fine motor. You do it with gross motor. So if I'm having a hard time articulating a number and writing a 2, I can have that on a piece of paper. I can just, all I need is an access point. So if I'm going to start the 2, I'm probably going to do this backwards because it doesn't make sense on the screen, but you figure out where the 2 is going to start, either here or here. Do you see what I mean? I'm not going to do this, but you can picture this. Kids reverse 3s all the time, right? They write an E because that's a character, right? They're not writing a T. They're writing just a backward version of the same thing. So if you have notebook paper and a spiral notebook, if you were to put your finger in the top hole, you see what I mean, of that notebook paper, and you're going to touch all those holes, make a 3. Do you see? Mm-hmm. You get 3 holes, and you start with the top, and you connect them all, and then you just keep getting it smaller and smaller and putting it on a line. All of a sudden, you're not going to reverse those anymore.
Okay.
Same thing with the 2. Put your finger in the top hole. So, I mean, you do that where you're learning gross motor so that you can intercede and say, you're going to start here or you're going to start here. The problem is if they're writing, they make the mistake and it never gets corrected. And they practice doing the wrong thing over and over again. If you're left-handed, you're really hosed because you cover it up as you're writing it. You can't even get the visual feedback. It's wrong if you knew what it looked like. Mm-hmm. So you've got to learn, you've got to confront that. You do gross motor therapies and you refine them to get the fine motor expression. And the more you do it, the more efficient they'll get.
Mm-hmm. Do you have graphic organizers to help them? I've got a lined piece of paper here, right? So
turn it sideways.
Yeah, but when you're doing, your numbers have to be lined up in a row, top to bottom, as you're doing certain.
Put that red margin line at the top. Do you see what I mean? And now you've got the lines that'll help. Don't use graph paper. It's in everybody's IEP. No, there's so many. If you've got a kid that's overwhelmed by visual structure and you give them graph paper, it's crazy. Don't do that.
No, I know, right?
Yeah, you get overwhelmed by all the little boxes. And if you go out of one box and into the next, where do you start?
Yeah.
So use primary paper and turn it so the lines are going vertically, or you can use tactile paper, which the lines are raised, and that'll keep constraining them. But again, the underlying problem there is motor planning. It's not the execution with the fine. They'll get better with the fine motor if they get better with the gross motor, and you can help them with that. Do you see?
Yeah.
So that's the secret. You don't ignore the therapy. You find one that's going to work.
Right. See? Oh my gosh, it's such valuable information.
It is. We've had a ton of questions come in. One of my favorite ones I wanted to get to first, if I can find it. We've had.
I'll go ahead and ask one real quick.
Okay.
What approach would you take with an 8th grade pre-algebra student that doesn't know his multiplication facts and still counts on his fingers for addition and subtraction, and not for lack of trying?
Yeah. Well, what you're really you've got to get, just like you need to learn sight words and things like that within the context of reading, you've got to learn some of these facts. And just having a table isn't going to be the answer. First of all, in a lot of the standardized tests, you can't bring a multiplication table in. You'd have to make it. But you can have efficient ways to do this. So I can show you your 2 times tables in a second here. You ready? So I don't know if you can you make my screen so my screen looks big for me?
And
if you can't, it's okay. So
no, I can't.
all right. So let's see.
There
All right. So if you guys, right now, I'm hoping I'm doing this the right way, but I'm looking at this as I'm seeing 6 fingers, right?
Yes.
Right. So if you were to take your hands and be a mirror to me, so in other words, put your fingers right on my fingers on the screen, and what we just did, and so make sure you got the 5
I'm afraid it's not going to be right. Okay.
But when you do it, you'll make 6 2 times, and it'll make a 10 and 2 ones. So I'll show you a picture. Maybe this will be easier. So I'm looking at this. Do you see this as how much blue stuff? There's 10, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 4 red dots, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm going to show you is that's 7. So 7 2 times is going to be, here, make sure I get it in the right orientation. It's backwards and upside down for me. All right. So do you see how I've expressed 7 2 times? I have the kids do this with finger painting, where they're sticking 7 fingers out, and they do it twice. They stamp 7 fingers twice, and it'll end up making one group of 10 and 4 ones, 14. So if you just have a strip of these along the top of your paper, you can make your 2 times facts in a second within your own reference frame, gets the 10s on the right side and the extra 1s, and now you're learning in a relational context. And that's what kids are not doing. You develop math by understanding and having a robust understanding of quantity from 1 to 10. That's got to happen. You got to do it in a way that you can manage it, not by counting. Like 12 can't be the number next to 11. It's 10 and 2 more. Do you see what I mean? Always compare to 5 and 10. After that, you'll learn how to do, after decomposing those numbers, you can start seeing comparisons and seeing consistencies. If you've been a reading teacher and you see a kid going from cat to that's cat, and you know they just processed it a different way, and the hairs on my arm are standing up because I remember doing this, breaking the code with a bunch of little kids. When you do that in the concept of math, and they say, 7 is 5 and 2 more, and it always is, and it's 2 plus 5, and like, yeah, it is. And if you have 2 7s, it's going to make a 10, and it's going to make 4 extra ones. I'm like, you win. You just broke it. You understand it, and then everything will improve. You got to start there. And usually that's the underlying problem. If you don't have this, you have no basis to compare numbers. You have no number sense, and everything becomes a 1-by-1 memorization task. And that stinks. It's memorized.
That's me. That's my whole life with math.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah. So Aspire Academy asked the question, what scientific research is being done to research how we can remediate dyscalculia? For dyslexia, we have OG. What is being done on the research front to develop good programs so I'm not just guessing as a practitioner?
Yeah, well, you're welcome. That would be me. So, yeah, no, I'm being a little grandstand there, but no, it's just emerging, and the parallels to language research are there. Guinevere Eden is doing a lot of. She just got a big NSF grant where she's looking at how you're processing. Stanislaus Dehaene. I've met him a few times. Brian Butterworth. Those are your go-to researchers that describe the process. The programs are not out there. The one that I have works really well. I don't sell it because of property laws and things like that, but I'll give it to you so you can go ahead and use it, and it works great. I've been doing it for 30 years. There's lots of research, and it's on my website. You look at the top at the menu and look for research articles, and everything I've talked about, all the citations are there. Many of the entire articles are there, so you can read them and decide for yourself. But I can tell you, as a person in the trenches, given kids that most people would say are uneducatable, I've proven them wrong. All right. So you can take them, you figure out what they have, and you move them forward. Kids that don't even have WISC scores because they could not go through the testing. All right. I've moved them forward and gotten them to be able to do and be able to be functional with math, with addition, subtraction, multiplication. And once they are, there's no stopping them. They keep going. So it's very exciting once you get in there.
Allison asked, are there any good books to help learn since I haven't been able to take one of your courses? I've tried to use your curriculum bank, but I would like to understand more. Yeah,
I do have some articles that I've written. There are position papers on all the different therapies that I have. If you look in, again, my website just got reorganized. I think it's better. If you looked at it maybe 2 months ago, it looks dramatically different now. And I've tried to make all the research articles in my position papers be much more accessible. I would go there. The best thing you could do, unfortunately, with all the COVID-19 bit is there's not a whole lot of classes happening, and it's very difficult for me to teach online when all these therapies are gross motor and I've got to squish Play-Doh with you and jump on things. You can get a picture, but it's tough. Demand for this is keeping me very busy, but that's the best way to learn is getting boots on the ground help. And I do have a section of my website designed to dedicated towards training and where I'm going. But I go to a lot of schools, do the training there, and leave the materials. I have a 1-week class at Landmark where I try to train an expert that I can talk to at the school that speaks my language, and then they can be the trainer. So that's a really good model. There are other models out there, but I don't see anything that has the ability to get kids to address that core deficit level that they need to. There's lots of research alluding to the fact that of what should be done, but there's not a lot of programs that go out there and do it. By not a lot, I mean virtually none. If you're counting on things, you're doing it wrong. So if you're looking at dots and counting them, that's not the program. Do not confuse that with what I'm doing. I'm not going to say the name, but you can figure it out. That's auditory processing. You're just counting dots. To do visual processing, it's not looking at stuff. It's being able to get the answer by looking at a pattern and not having to, and being able to go whole to part and not part to whole.
Okay.
Can parents take your trainings?
Excuse me?
Can parents take your trainings?
Absolutely.
Okay. Brandy asked the question, is there an easy way to locate online or locally tutors that have been trained in your methods?
I can't do that due to liability. I don't license anybody. I give training, and I do provide some online support. So you can ask them if they've been trained, but I don't manage that just because legally it could get me into a lot of trouble. So I stay out of that. But I try to train everybody I can. So sometimes that means people will email me directly and say, give me a little nudge. I like to see that after they've at least tried to look at the website and look at some of the resources that are already out there, because I do have a finite amount of time, but I'm a sucker for helping people. So, have at it. I'll try to get back to you.
Oh my goodness. I'm going to be calling you. No, but how does one access one of your trainings? Did you already say that?
Yeah, it's on the website. There's a professional development bar at the top. And if you go down, I present all over the place. It's just right now I'm not presenting, but I guess, I have history in 70% of the states where I travel everywhere. I'm always at the national conferences for IDA, LDA, educational therapist conventions. I go to a lot of those. don't tend to go to mainstream math ones. It's just a function of how I'm funded and where I'm able to go because I have a job I have to go to. So it's all, on my own time.
Can you use an abacus as a visual support? That question comes from Kimberly.
You can. It helps if you're, Egyptian. No, I'm just kidding. Again, there's lots of different ways. It's just to get at that core deficit. No, you want to use a pattern. You want to use a pattern and go hold apart. I have seen abacus work. I'm not going to say it doesn't work if you found success with it. It's just not the way that I go. It's not the direction I go in.
So we had two questions that are kind of similar to each other. So I'm going to give you both.
Okay.
Is all the math on the site Common Core is one of them. And the other one is, how has Common Core affected the math?
Yeah, all the Common Core is how I organize everything in the curriculum bank. And I'm doing an update. You'll notice there's a part for it to be updated to the 2017 standards. It's pretty similar. It's just organized a little bit differently. Yeah, everything that I'm talking about, even going way back to this core deficit, if you go down to look at Common Core standards for pre-K and kindergarten, it says to do all the things I'm talking about in terms of decomposing numbers to a base 5, base 10, looking at what something's missing to make 5, what's something missing to make 10, and shapes and all the things that go together. It's all in there. It's just nobody has the program out that executes that line item. So it's also, you'll notice that it's written in Klingon. It's almost impossible for a regular teacher to understand what the heck the standards you're talking about. So I try to put examples of, this is what this looks like. This is my interpretation of what this line item looks like, because it's very hard to discern what they're trying to get at by their descriptions.
So we're going to do a little shout out here. Dawn, she is our, I'm going to say Illinois, and then with my luck, it's Indiana, but I'm pretty sure it's Illinois. Now that I'm on the spot, I'm drawing a blank. Sorry.
Illinois, yeah.
Illinois leader.
Yeah.
She says, please tell you that her son, JJ, who's 16 years old, is tearing up watching this video because he's like, yes, he gets it. This is exactly what I've been trying to tell my teachers my whole life.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I get a lot of that. And once the therapists start working with the kids with these methodologies, once you see the light, you're not going back in that cave. You know what I mean? You get the immediate feeling that kid really got it and got it for life. And I'll have to do it 3 times, but I don't have to do it every day anymore. So it can be really effective, and it's why I keep doing it. Trust me, I'm not doing it for the money, right? So everything's free.
Oh, I know. And this is so exciting for me as a tutor, because I've always said I don't do math. And I can. I can work with my students on this stuff.
Yeah. Well, and Joyce said teachers must care enough to correct. Not correcting does kids no favors. But you have to care enough to correct and connect, I think, is the key. Yeah,
I mean, I look at that when Carol Dweck is talking about growth mindset, and she says, look, it's not enough to just say you tried at it. You have to try at it and get it right. You have to go and do that. And if they're not doing it right, you have to be able to get in there and say, if you keep doing it that way, it'll keep being wrong. You're going to have to change, and show them a way that they can change, that they can grapple with. Again, usually the person that has to change is the teacher, not the kid. Yeah. The teacher's the one that has to adapt to the kid that doesn't understand what you're saying. So you've got to evolve. You can't just ask the kid to sprout another hand out their forehead. Yeah. You're going to have to change. And that's terrifying to some people that have been doing the same thing for 20 years. But if it's not working for a certain student, they're not treatment resistant. They're just resistant to your treatment. You can go, and if you change, I think you're going to find that there's much more opportunities for you to reach that kid. And it's your, it's your duty. It's not that people are trying to do the wrong thing. I think it's just they don't know what to do, and they don't have the support to be able to do it. It's terrifying to deviate from the plan when everybody says, this is what you do, this is what's in the book. You find comfort in that. And it works for about 70% and a little more. And that's why textbook companies, both of them are successful creating stuff because it's familiar, but they're not dynamic, and there's no dynamic for change. I'm not going to say the name that begins with P, but you know who that big company is. There's no reason for them to change. There's a monopoly, and they don't have to change. It's like you had one car company in the United States. They don't have to be dynamic and change, because if you want a car, you've got to buy it from them. And if you're going to get it tested, you're going to buy their testing equipment and everything else. So you got to go Bernie Sanders on this a little bit and go grassroots and figure out what works. People are going to argue with you, but you got to at least agree with them or not agree with them. You know where he stands. At least I've met him a couple of times. He's a nice guy.
I love it.
I'm just saying, he's not afraid to speak his mind. You might have be horrified by his policy, but he walks what he talks, and he's willing to do something different if he believes in it. And that's, why I respect him. But the big picture here is, again, the person that's got to change is not the kid. They don't have the ability to change. It's got to be the program. And there's no dynamics within the context of reading and language. Funding from big government sources for reading, that can inspire change. With math, it's you're buying another package. You see what I mean? There's not a lot of divergent strategies, and that's why being able to look at this with fresh perspective is important.
So Mike Jones commented, Mike Jones with Nessie, and he said that they're hosting this as on Nessie as a watch party. Can we send along questions to Chris after this?
I'm here. Anything for Nessie. Look, I'm drinking from the Nessie cup right here.
I know. Oh, I love it. And then somebody said, where has he been all my life? I'm thinking the same thing right now, Dawn.
I know.
Yeah, well, I'm in a very small boat, but I've got really long oars. I'm trying to make a wake. So get on board with me, and let's shake things up, and we'll get more people. And that's how things change. They're not going to change from the top down. They're going to change from doing the same thing that you guys are doing, empowering people, letting them know there's a different way to go about it. Don't be afraid to ask questions and demand some results. And you get enough pitchforks and torches, and all of a sudden, they had to open the castle gate, right? So that's what we got to believe in.
I love it.
RB Baker asked the question, at what point do you move on to a new math topic when the previous topic has not been mastered?
Yeah, why would you want to do that? I mean, if you I always think about it this way. You've got to have those subroutines built in before you build a larger structure. So no sense tackling long division unless you know how to subtract and multiply and divide, single digit things and understand all the language. You really have to build all these structures. And there's not enough time with the modern curriculum. It's a mile wide and an inch deep, and it doesn't give the kids the fundamental, all the kids enough time to develop those fundamental skills that they need to move on. It does fine for, again, like 70% of the kids are doing okay. But the kids that aren't, that are either bored because it's not pushing them enough, or the kids that can't access the curriculum, it's very difficult. And I find, again, you've got to approach the child where they are. There's not a lot of models that are set up to do that, but that doesn't mean that it's right. At Landmark, we figure out exactly where you are, provide you the instruction in a homogeneous group where we've got 8 or fewer kids. Those kids move fast. I can make 2 years gain in a year if I'm doing that. So it's not trying to attack at the level, the grade level. It's where the kid is. Give them the instruction they need there and move up as fast as you can. And if that kid can move to a higher class, he moves. That's a really effective model. And I can't apologize for something that works. If you don't have that, well, it's what you need. Some of these kids are not going to function well in a class of 22 with somebody explaining it louder sitting next to their desk. They need something different. Some kids need more, some kids need different. That's true in language. And It's just for some reason we haven't wrapped our ears around the fact that kids need that same same differentiated instruction in math sometimes. So
Amy asked the question, is there an online assessment to find the gaps a student may have at those lower skill levels?
I have that. You have to know how to interpret it. Again, most testing has to do with how quickly you can write. It has to do with fluency, things like that, or it shows dysfunction in terms of how you're doing with grade level skills. You can look at those tests and figure out what sub-skills are deficient. I have that test, but you have to be trained to be able to give it. Maybe if that person emails me, I'll try to. I have a feeling I'm opening myself up to a couple of emails there, but I do return all my emails. It might not be today, but I'll try to hook you that up. I have that test.
You were so kind. Michelle Watts Crane says, I love that my OT has made all of these suggestions for gross motor. So OTs are best friends in all this as well, a lot of the times in the schools for helping kids get what they need.
And the language therapist, because I mean, you'll have kids, you have language therapists doing specific strategies like the lips therapy, things like that. You can do the same exact thing with math. You can use felt blocks to represent numbers and change them and understand place value. You can adapt all those strategies that are out there that work for a kid in language to math. So I have some of those. I have some of those in my site, but again, it's incredibly frustrating for me, even as a parent of two kids that have received special therapy. When you see them back in the regular ed environment, and it's like you say, well, this is a therapy that would work, and trust me, I know what I'm talking about. It's like, well, we do this and this and this. Yeah. I'm like, well, that's frustrating.
I bet it is. I know.
Well, and Julie Childers calls out the Woodin Math Facebook group, which is people using it on their own, parents outside of a school context. So she recommends looking up that group.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, I have nothing to do with it. I go on once in a while just for my ego, but it's got my name on it, but it's not me. So, but yeah, a bunch of like-minded parents using my therapies, and they feel comfortable sharing their success stories, and when they run into a roadblock, they ask for help, and other people in that group provide help of how they've gotten through it, how they've been able to get help and move through resistance points. So that's a great place to go.
And is it okay to move on while keeping visual supports in place, or should they be weaned?
Oh, you definitely have to pull all those all those graphic organizers. You need to go with diminishing support. So you teach the kid to make their own graphic organizer. You've got to pull away that. They replace it with their ability to do it in writing, and they develop the language skills to be able to do that. So you give them lots of structure. You pull the structure away. You have the kids learn to describe that. They replace your structure with their language skills, and that's how it works. But you're giving them the ability to sequence everything and build up those verbal stockpiles of recipes and scripts.
So here's going to be our last question, because I think I've gotten through all of them and they kind of keep coming in. So if we don't cut it off, we'll keep you here for hours asking questions.
I'll come back sometime.
Yeah, we need you back for sure.
Definitely. Jennifer asked the question, as a community college professor teaching first year accounting, I often have students who are struggling with the basic math and dyslexia. Any recommendations on sites or programs for them to try to use and help them at that level?
Yeah, like I said, there's not a lot of programs that are diagnostic and prescriptive with regard to a student's specific problem. So there's lots of reasons for dysfunction, and you need to look at the individual cognitive assets of each kid. Figure out what's the underlying problem. It's not usually how it's expressed on your test. It's what's going on to create that lack of proficiency. And it's usually not the skill you're teaching. It's something that they don't have. And there just isn't a program written for that. You've got to drive. You have to do the assessment. Perhaps there's an assessment, a cognitive assessment already done by a neuropsych, you look at that, but you have to know how to interpret and make the plan of action. There's not a canned script that fixes everybody. Everybody's different, and you've got to acknowledge that to be really efficient and get at the core problem and move them forward.
Okay.
I love that you say that. That is so important. And that's why we have individualized education plans. So
yeah, and it's why I don't try to make another better rubber stamp. I give you lots of therapies, but you got to use them in different combinations for different kids. Do you see what I mean? So you've got to drive. There's no book out there or a program. If there's a specific defined problem, there's more courses of action that could be more specific. And if you're attacking that core deficit, that's what Nestie's going to be doing, working on. Here's a real defined issue that you want to work on. It's not really meant to be remedial, but it's meant to teach everybody in a way that just about everybody can participate, as opposed to excluding some kids by counting. So it's complicated. And anybody that says, well, this is what you do and you fix everybody, well, it just isn't true. It's one pair of shoes is not going to, make everybody's foot needs be accomplished. You're going to have to figure out what the underlying problem is and address that individually.
Very cool. Well, gosh, Chris.
I know, right? We could talk all day, but
well, we almost are.
We almost have. Thank you so much for doing this today and for sticking with the schedule too, but it's not like any of us were going anywhere.
And I'm so sorry for my technical difficulties, and I can't wait to take your trainings. I am so excited about learning from you.
Yes.
Well, fun.
Next time you're in Houston, I'm definitely going to come check you out. And if somebody tries to pull me out for some board business, I'm not leaving.
There you go.
I was telling Chris that I saw him last year at Houston branch of the IDA's spring conference.
Wow.
I went into one of his sessions and I was enthralled with what he was saying, but my phone was blowing up because I had to go do the door prizes. So I had to leave early.
Oh, no.
And I was so upset because I was like, wait a minute, he's giving me the keys to the kingdom right now.
Oh, horrible. Yeah, you'll have to, next time that's not going to happen.
No, definitely not. But thank you so much for joining us today, and have a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend, and stay safe and healthy and well.
Too. Yeah, the sun just came out. I'm very excited.
I'm not going to
This
see
was such a gift today for so many I know. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Definitely.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Bye.
Everybody take care.
All right. Bye.